I learned what that meant, but I was absolutely appalled, that we have a word for someone. We have an adjective that you could describe that someone is not wearing underwear. It's actually funny. There's a Latin expression. How's it go? Semper ubi sub ubi, which is Latin for semper ubi means always where, but now ubi in that sense is where are you? So that's wrong, right? But semper ubi, always where. Sub ubi means under where. But still, ubi is where are you? So it's wrong, but basically it's just a hilarious Latin thing for semper ubi sub ubi, as if it's a Latin motto, but it basically translates to always wear underwear. So it's just dumb. Just dumb.
I feel like every generation has slang though.
Oh yeah, I imagine. Well, I don't know about every generation, but it's definitely.
I feel like old timey slang, like people used to say, "Look at that broad." We don't say that. Thank you.
My daughter was born in Berlin,
Really?
and that's overseas. So she got and she got a certificate that said she's an American citizen born abroad. I said, that's silly, she needs a certificate for that. You could take one look at her and you can tell she's abroad.
Oh
She hates that joke. Well, actually, she should hate it, but she's so used to it that she They have so many of these now. So the Bach Stiftung is the Bach Seminary, although it's not a seminary, it's the academy, I guess, would be the closest thing you might. Well, I'll just pick one. That's interesting. Maybe they're all. Evangelicia means a Protestant church. I think it's the same approximately as evangelical. Notice the church has no decoration other than some carvings, but no paintings, no stained glass, I believe. Pretty sure. Just to give you a sample, pick on Bach, could pick others, of course, at this time, but Bach strikes me as probably the most consequential, most important. Although, even after his own time period, he kind of vanished into obscurity for a while until Mendelssohn, Felix, which means happy, Mendelssohn, kind of reintroduced them to people much later, and then Bach became as famous, well, now as he is. But it strikes me as odd that after Bach's period and even during Bach's period, the music that was listened to in various venues was contemporary. In other words, you always want to hear the newest thing. There wasn't a tradition of playing old stuff. The idea of going back and looking into historically important musical work and playing it again didn't really happen until, I guess, at least Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn, which, by the way, Mendelssohn was born within days of Abe Lincoln and Charles Darwin. And by the way, Charles Darwin and Abe Lincoln were both born on the same day. So that's just fun. In any case, so Bach, if you're thinking, okay, Kant, Immanuel Kant, what kind of music might he have been familiar with? It was interesting, I had said that they didn't have his tomb anymore because it had been bombed. That's what I had read. Over the weekend, I was looking up other things, and I discovered that they have a memorial for Kant in Königsberg, or the new name of the town today is Kaliningrad. Grad means city in Russian, and Kalinin, I don't know who Kalinin was, why they renamed the town after him. In any case, so you can look up his grave. It's interesting. They do have a museum that you could go visit. It's in the top of a church, which is kind of weird. They had some really strange-looking things, but it was interesting to see pictures of it. So remember to check everything I say, because I'm old and I know I've relayed wrong information to people. I've discovered things. I used to point out that Kurt Gödel, for example, couldn't eat on his own. He absolutely depended on his wife, and I thought his wife had died, and so he was dependent on Einstein, his friend, to make sure that he had enough to eat for a while, but even that stopped, and Gödel starved to death. Totally wrong. Einstein died in like 56 or something, and Gödel didn't die until the 70s, 76, something like that. And the reason he had trouble eating at one point, regarding his wife was the one that actually made sure his food was not poisoned. Oh shoot, I don't know if so here's Kurt Gödel. By the way, he was not Jewish, but a lot of Germans thought he was. So that's just a whole nother interesting thing. But he was worried that there were people out to get him. There probably were, actually. So he was afraid of his food, so his wife would always taste it first. But his wife did end up being sick and ended up in the hospital for a while, about 6 months or something, and Gödel almost died during that time period. And he did, in fact, eventually die of starvation. That was the cause of death. He literally starved himself to death. His wife was still alive, though, at the time. She lived until she was in her 80s. But I just read that the other day, and I was totally shocked that where did I get all that bogus information about Einstein? I must have read it someplace. That's not like something you just make up on your own. So some other author totally misled me on that. As far as I know, actually, where did I get the newest information? I got it from Rebecca Goldstein's book, Incompleteness, which I should show you, I guess, if you want to double check it. Goldstein, Incompleteness. Which, by the way, is a terrific book to read at night before you're trying to fall asleep, because it's all about math and logic, and I can't imagine anything that will put you out faster than that kind of a book. So, except maybe Hegel. You could read Hegel. Hegel will put you out pretty fast. Although you gradually get used to reading. You could read a couple pages of Hegel before you fall asleep after a while. I don't know why people need medications to fall asleep. There's so much perfect reading material out there that could do that for you just amazingly. By the way, Rebecca Goldstein is the wife of Steven Pinker. You're familiar with Steven Pinker? Everybody's familiar with Steven Pinker, yes? No. Wow. It's okay. That's that rabbit hole. So if I keep going, we'll never get back to Kant. So let me go back to Kant. Steven Pinker's pretty fascinating today. And by the way, both Rebecca and Stephen are Ashkenazi Jewish people, which I'm so jealous. I would have loved to have discovered that I was Ashkenazi, but nope, not even close.
You don't think it's real, though? You don't think, like, their genetic makeup actually makes them smart?
It's just statistically the case that their IQs generally
Maybe it's
run in the
some
140s.
self-fulfilling, though. Like, if you're told your entire life that you're gonna have 140 IQ, maybe you live
I don't. There. Believe it or not, I've watched lectures of people trying to figure out why are the Ashkenazi so smart. That's a thing, actually. So that's kind of cool. Okay, but so how about Kant? I mentioned last week that I think there's an association with autism, which is considered extreme maleness. I don't know if you would consider that correct, but notice it is typically more of a male brain issue than a female brain issue, although there are some females who have autism. But I think you could study those individuals. You know that brains, when they're in the womb, human beings, at roughly 6 weeks, in fact, I think it's precisely at 6 weeks in the womb, experience a point where, depending on their either XX genetic configuration or their XY configuration, and the amount of testosterone in the mother's system, the brain splits if it's an XY, and it remains the same if it's XX. And so this brain splitting literally is the corpus callosum shrinking in what then becomes a male-brained fetus, as opposed to the female-brained fetus, where the corpus callosum remains much larger. It can change, so just because you're, say, XX doesn't necessarily mean that your brain will be female, because if there's sufficient testosterone in the mother's system, it can still trigger the split, and it would be a male-brained female, which, yes, that does seem to be the connection between those females that are attracted to females, as opposed to, it's all kinds of interesting stuff. So why autism associated with male-brained individuals, kind of interesting. In any case, those folks tend to be more mathematically inclined, could also be directionally interesting. Cab drivers, for instance, in London have been tested, and the areas of their brain that are focused on direction are enlarged. And of course they studied Einstein's brain for the same reason and found his brain to be enlarged in that area. His brain is still driving around somewhere, isn't it? In a vat someplace. It's kind of weird. Okay, so autism, throw that in there. It's kind of an interesting analysis. But why is Kant answering Jung? Remember last class we talked about how reading David Hume woke him from his rationalist slumbers, because he realized that David Hume's argument did totally wipe out the grounds for doing metaphysics. And so he had to figure out how to answer Hume and find another explanation for how you could have a synthetic a priori. Remember this? This is what we're trying to figure out. Where does the synthetic a priori come from? So it's known to be true on a priori grounds. one that is factual but universally and necessarily true. So the Kantian conception that the basic propositions of geometry and physics are synthetic a priori, and some others. So what exactly is the problem? Well, can we have intuitions of what is true apart from our experience?
Yes.
That's what he is going to say that, yes. Hume is saying you can't, and that's why you can't do metaphysics. Kant is basically going to say, yes, you can have intuitions of something that's true prior to having experience that might teach you that. So what kinds of examples are these? Time is his first one. Everything we experience in time. We have a sense of time elapsing in order for us to have experience. Everybody agree? Can't conceive of any experience without time going on while you're having the experience, right? I mean, what the heck would that be without it, right? I mean, you know, I think he's absolutely right there. We experience time. By the way, this is kind of interesting. If we look at, probably already showed you this, Einstein's cone, time cone, light cone. This is a multiple person cone because each of these are individual cones, but the light cone, so there. Notice you are right here. That's you. And so this is your universe. And notice that you were moving through time. So consciousness occurs in time. So that's the first one. And Hume did not think of that. So Kant is solving at least one a priori awareness that we have, and that is that all of our experience is going through time. The second one is space, that we experience anything that has shape takes up space. So for example, I never remember to do this. I should bring an orange, because that's what I think he talks about as an orange, right? But imagine if I had no, it doesn't work that way. I have to do it with an actual thing. Okay, glasses. I have glasses. So here's an object. You can all see the object. I'm holding it here. Now imagine the space that these glasses take up, right here. But now watch what happens when I take the glasses away. Focus on the space, right? Just keep watching the space. Notice? Okay, maybe that seems dumb, but the point he's making is that the space continues there in our minds, despite the fact that the object is no longer there. In other words, is this proof that the space we perceive isn't something that we experience from the phenomena, but is instead something that our minds impose on the phenomena. Your brain arranges things. You're seeing space, but the space is actually imposed by you. Think of it that, if you took like some sort of a device that measures the space, right? And you're using it to look at the room. It's pretty obvious that the shape that's recorded by the device is going to be dependent on the way it arranges the space, the way it perceives the space. Does that make sense? You have different devices. So this is essentially what Kant is trying to do, is say that the reason that we perceive things in space and time, we already did time, right, is because our minds structure our perceptions in space and time. So of course, he's not arguing that there isn't space out there, that there isn't time out there, but our perception of it comes from the way the human mind structures our experience. There's a lot of things that make sense to us that way. We think of some things as, gosh, time seems to be going fast. When you're having fun, you go down to Disney World or something, and you just get there, and before long, that's the end of the vacation, and you're on your way back, and you think, wow, that was too fast. On the other hand, suffering through kidney stones or something, seems to take forever. They'll pass any moment. Yeah, well, it's been 3 days, or whatever, right? So suffering for some reason seems to drag things out, but pleasure seems to make things just go so fast, right? So it seems like time speeds up or slows down depending on the individual's perception of it. Does that make sense? So, but that's just one way of thinking of it. But then he also gives us, it's in the book, but categories of mind. Let's see an image here. All right, here's one. Is that big enough to see, this chart? I might be able to make it bigger. Let's see. No, why does it do that? Ah, there we go, okay. So here's the categories of der reine Vernunft, right? A pure understanding, a pure reason. And so notice we've got quantity, quality, relations, and modes, modality, right? So everything we experience as one. One class, one day, one world, one meal, one friend, one spoonful of sugar, if you like, right? All of that we can think of as one. On the other hand, we have lots of people in the class, we have lots of planets and stars and you name galaxies in the universe. We have lots of grains of sugar in a spoonful of sugar, right? So everything that we experience as one and many. Now, just that combination alone, notice, was a famous antinomy or paradox for the Greeks. Because if you remember, Parmenides argued, para meaning two, mena, unchanging ideas, right? Parmenides, right? Two unchanging ideas that nonetheless were, even though they were both necessary at the same time, they were in conflict. And for Parmenides, the Greek philosopher, the problem was the one and the many. And so as far as he's concerned, the universe is one. And yet at the same time, it's obvious that it's also many. It blew the Greeks' minds how something could be both one and many. It did not make sense to them how to figure that out. And all of the Greek antinomies of that sort are, except for the motion problems, were based on the idea of conflicts that Kant now resolves by pointing out that instead of being characteristics of the things themselves, which, remember, we cannot actually see the things in themselves for Kant, because he accepted Hume, who accepted Berkeley, who accepted Locke, right? So you've got that collection now of problems, right? So we can't actually see the things in themselves, but the reason we see everything as having unity and as having parts is not because the thing in themselves have those characteristics. It's because our mind perceives things as having those characteristics. In the same way that we perceive space and we experience time flowing, the reason that we think of something as being one or many is because that's what the human mind does to everything. And that's not a problem. That's a unique tool, actually, that we can do that. So we no longer have that mind-blowing problem that the Greeks had, thank you, Kant, because now we know it's not that there's this contradictory nature in the object itself. It's instead the way we look at it. It's like, wow, phew, what an easy solution. Why didn't we think of it? Apparently not. But thank you, Kant. Now we know. And the same thing happens with regard to totality, the whole thing. Whether something's real or not. Are unicorns real? No. Horses? Yes. But what gives us the sense that things are real or not? Negation? That's the terrible twos. We start thinking of the not. You know, if you've ever puzzled it out. Now, I do puzzle it out with my dog because I'm aware of this issue, right? So when I call the dog in and the dog looks at me and just basically, you know, what's the right expression for it? You know, says no, right? You know, not no, but hell no, you know, basically, you know, as far as the dog is concerned. There's too much to bark at out there, right? You know, people are doing stuff. I forgot to bark at them. I'm trying to get the dog in so she won't be barking at the people, right? But, you know, as far as she's concerned, she's got a job to do. She's not going to listen to me, right? So I think dogs can say no. I don't know if that's maybe we teach them that. I don't know. But kids certainly learn it, roughly around 2, right? That's when the kid will, you know, you say, come here, and am I allowed to refer to Bill Cosby? I know he's verboten now, but still, I mean, he's still so much a part of my brain that when he does the kid, you know, come here, and the kid says, no, that's yes, right? As he explains to the child, right? You know, so, you know, at a certain point, human beings learn to say no. Hegel, by the way, absolutely beautifully describes this as when our imagination develops, that we can imagine the opposite of something, right? So apparently human beings can say no. I don't think negation exists in nature apart from our interpretation of things as being not, right? There's perhaps an absence of things. This is kind of fun. One of Slavoj Žižek's books is titled Less Than Nothing. Sorry about the naked lady that's displaying her butt in your face. She's climbing over the red line. The book actually explains that. She's the less than nothing. That's the line is the entire universe, and she's basically, well, remember, he's supposed to be absolutely the most dangerous philosopher in the world right now because of his weird thinking. Pardon? Yeah, that's a tick that he has. He's explained it's not that he's been using cocaine too much.
Yeah, no,
A lot of people don't believe in him, but I'm pretty sure. Who knows? I didn't know Robin Williams used drugs. I was so horrified when I discovered that. He had been using drugs like crazy, and still kind of dabbled even after Belushi died, so, hateful. In any case, so Less Than Nothing. By the way, this is his major work on the topic of being. When we look at kind of the history of it, Kant definitely talks about the nature of being. Hegel will give us a book, his Logic, that talks about being and nothingness. But that title actually will be used by Jean-Paul Sartre as being and nothingness, l'être et le néant. Right? So, by Sartre. It's the title of his book. Everything exists, but human being is that negation that's buried in the heart of being like a worm, coiled in the heart of being like a worm, kind of like in an apple, I suppose, that we say no. So negation comes into the world from our human being, and we can say no. No, en français, right? L'être is being, and néant is nothingness. Heidegger responds, it's kind of a dialogue between Sartre and Heidegger, and for Heidegger it's being and time. And notice both of these are playing on characteristics in Kant's philosophy, being in time. Which is Heidegger's main work. And there's others. It's like each of the major philosophers is going to have to play on this concept of being as they go. For Alain Badiou, it's the logic of worlds. But the first part of it, the logic of worlds, is being an event. That what enables us to experience things is the set of predicates that we use to define a particular event. And what an event is, in this sense, is whatever, in any particular context, we use language to define. So sitting in the chair is an event of a sort. An atomic explosion, of course, could be an event. But a glass being empty is an event. And then when it's full of water, that's an event. So events are just his way of expressing whatever sets we want to discuss, basically. And what creates it for us is our linguistic awareness of that event that we're experiencing. And language is clearly an important part of our being able to have the experience of an event. So what's important about all of this and these characteristics? There are other ones, by the way. These are the categories of pure understanding, but he also has categories of judgment. They piggyback on the others, but this looks not very helpful. Is that an earthquake?
I hope not.
We had a 4.4 just yesterday morning, so I'm getting worse. I think I'm going to have to move to the big island of Hawaii to get some no, wait, that wouldn't help, would it? That's my favorite island in Hawaii, by the way, the big island. Oahu is where I lived for 3 years, but It's like living in New York City in the summertime. It's just crazy. Except for the oceans all around. But, okay, so Kant gives us what Kant calls the Copernican revolution in thought. And I think that's really a weird thing for Kant to call it, because if you remember, Copernicus, his revolution was to say that the sun was the center and not the earth, right? And what Kant is saying here is that we are the center, right? That's just like I lost it. I had it, but remember the cone, Einstein's cone, right? The light cone. So that light cone, it puts us right here. So in a sense, this is Kant's view of us. The universe is centered on us. We're the ones that perceive it. We're the ones that experience the flow of time and all the categories that we use in order to classify things come from us. Now, after Kant, everyone in the academic world is either a Kantian or they believe someone else who was a Kantian. So this is an argument that does answer Hume in the affirmative. It brings philosophy back to thinking that it can actually accomplish stuff. Plus, they think it's right. And today, I'm pretty sure you all grew up believing that you were you had your perspective. I don't know if it was emphasized so that you realize that you hear it in advice. When people get angry at something, you're so angry at something, and people will tell you, give you advice and say, remember, you're the one that's interpreting it and making it so that you're angry. You can change your mind. You hear that a lot, right? Change your mind and change your life, right? You're the one that's seeing things this way. All you have to do is change your mind so that you're happy now, right? That's, you hear that advice a lot. That's, in a sense, a Kantian perspective. That, that the way the world looks to you is actually your decision. That's something that Kant suggests that Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, really picks up on as that French version of existentialism, that you are existing and what you're experiencing is basically your decision. You're the one that's responsible for the way the world looks to you. Don't blame it on other people. Because if the world bothers you the way it is, it's your obligation to go out there and change it. But don't feel like it's not your fault. That's when you're being inauthentic, when you're thinking that it's other people's fault for the way things are. But you're the one that's responsible for how you perceive the world and what happens in the world, literally. Very annoying, actually, because obviously there's so much out in the world that you can't change. That's kind of important, I think, too. Because that's where I love the directions that you usually see on top of a secretary's wall, right, where it says, Lord, give me, I forget the whole directions, but, to change the things I can and put up with the things I can't, right? Yeah, you've heard that. It seems like we need really to recognize that there are things out there that we can't really change. But Kant is going to give us this, what he calls a Copernican revolution in thought. And that's recognizing that our minds structure the way we perceive reality. But there are, of course, problems with this. So I mean, you have to be a Kantian to be a contemporary Western academic and recognize that humans perceive things a certain way, and the way the universe looks to us is because of that human nature. But the question that breaks this into different groupings, the reaction to Kant, is how this works. Because Kant, remember, lived in Königsberg, never left. Everything he liked structured exactly the same way. I blame that on perhaps his being autistic, but in any case, he just really liked patterns and everything. Plus, his community was a relatively small, except for the bridges. Well, the bridges are weird. I don't know if you've ever looked up the problem of the bridges in Königsberg. They're not there anymore. Most of them were destroyed, I think, by the war. But it used to be a puzzle how you would get from. Never mind. Or, gotta do it. Bridge problem. So there's the bridges in Königsberg. And the problem is, how could you cross them without crossing any of them twice? Was that the problem? As if the 7 bridges of the city of Königsberg, formerly in Germany but now known as Kaliningrad and part of Russia, over the river Prager, can all be traversed in a single trip without doubling back. So it's just, sorry. Okay. But so, Kant thought all rational people would experience phenomena exactly the same way if you're rational. So the problem of a person who doesn't behave the way the norms expect, the crazy person, the criminal, etc., was a problem, because basically Kant was saying, well, that person isn't rational. If you're rational, you'll behave the way a rational person would behave. Well, that worked if you were looking at a limited set of people in Königsberg. But what the problem, of course, is that when you go to other cultures, and you can see clear differences between the way people behave over things, women driving a car in Saudi Arabia, just allowed now, apparently. Why was it against the law for women to drive a car in Saudi Arabia? Some crazy imams thought that the vibrations of driving a car would be so sexually stimulating to women that it would be haram. Is that one answer for that? Right? It would be evil. It would be a sin, for women to drive a car because they would have too much fun. That's just crazy. Because clearly it's teenage boys that have the most fun driving a car. I've seen that even just in the snowstorm recently, by the way, driving by a parking lot, and you see a couple of guys in pickup trucks doing wheelies out on the right. You know how that is. Do you ever see women doing that? Is that a non-politically correct question? But what on earth would make Saudi Arabia act that way compared to, say, Europe, France? You can't imagine not allowing women to drive in France. It's just crazy, right? Would that mean that one country is rational and the other one not? let me make this a quiz question. How's this? This will be fun. Are some cultures more rational than others? Are some cultures more rational than others? In his book, Yuval Noah Harari, in his book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. In one chapter, I don't think it gives us the chapters at all. I can check and see. But in one chapter, table of contents. It might be this chapter here, on secularism. He argues that it's pretty obvious that some cultures are better than others in some respects. Of course, now the question becomes, are some cultures better than others? Or are some cultures more rational than others? But the thing is, Kant argues that all rational people see things the same way. That's clearly false. So it worked in Königsberg in his day for the people that he knew, but what became obvious and obviouser to others who were more culturally aware of all the differences in the world, that there were tremendous differences between groups of people, different cultures, and certainly there are differences between individuals. You could be rational, and someone else could be rational, and yet you have two totally different opinions. We could talk about that with regard to how to solve the budget problem, for example. You know, it's a pretty obvious situation for us. I mean, we have people that feel like you can't spend more money than you're taking in, so we have to cut the budget. And other people saying, well, but you can't cut the budget if what that means is you're going to be putting 10,000 people or so out of work, right? You know, that would actually be worse, right? So these are two rational people working within a particular rational framework that overlaps enough for them to communicate with one another, and yet at the same time, they're not going to come up with the exact same response. So clearly, Kant is totally wrong in thinking that all rational people are going to experience phenomena the same way. But what Kant was trying to do is explain why it was that what looks blue to you is blue to me, what is up to me. You know, we all share all these characteristics the same, etc. Clearly, someone is getting a phone call. That's okay. That was hilarious, actually. I like that. No, you're not getting a phone call.
I keep telling myself to change it.
Does that mean that the battery is charged?
Yeah.
Ah, that's pretty cool. See, all rational people that are familiar with cell phones knew that that was a cell phone. None of us really thought it was a train coming down the track, you know, so that's pretty fortunate, because otherwise we'd all be running, like, where the hell is the train coming from, you know? So that's just fun. So, I mean, we have a lot of shared experiences that we do understand. Say, for example, you're driving along the road, you're in Detroit, and it's evening, and it's already dark. You're coming home from work, it's rush hour, and everyone else is, of course, on the same road, and so the road is absolutely packed. And by the way, there's no escape route because there's concrete walls on both sides. So you're driving along, and something has totally stopped traffic ahead of you. So you're all just stuck sitting there in traffic, right? And you look next to you, and you see a beautiful woman sitting in the car next to you. And behind her are three ugly guys in their car. And these three ugly guys are absolutely furious with the woman in the car next to you. And since the traffic's completely stalled, they get out of their car and they come over to her car and they start pounding on her car to try to get her out of her car. And you're sitting there watching this. And you think, if they get that car open, they're going to kill her. They're so furious. What would your moral obligation be in that situation?
Help.
Get out of the car and tell them to go away, or you'll beat the crap out of them.
I don't think violence is the answer.
So what would you do?
Call the police from
Talk
the car.
That would help, except, of course, back in the day when this happened, there were no cell
You could
phones.
send a pigeon. But it takes a little longer.
Surely stopping the bystander effect since it's heavy traffic. Make it a group combat. Very
Have like a sign against your window, like who wants to join me in taking down these guys?
What actually happened in this particular event was the woman hopped out of the car and made a run for it, and the three guys chased her. I believe they actually started beating her, and at one point she jumped into the dark water off the bridge to escape them, but couldn't swim, so died. But the crowd did not help. So this is one of those cases where all the people just basically watched. It seems here there's argument that some of the crowd actually cheered instead of trying to stop. Which I'm sure you'd had to have been there. But Kant thinks that any rational person so connect the dots here. When you're experiencing anything in the sense world, whatever, you're seeing a triangle. We all know it's a triangle. If you've been raised to know that this is the shape of a triangle, if you see a triangle, you know it's a triangle. No doubt that you have the visual stimulus of a triangle, right? In fact, if I ask how many triangles are there in this room, there's an infinite number of triangles, etc. But we can certainly map out triangles. We know when we're seeing triangles. We usually think that when we see a moral dilemma, that is a problem, that we can't actually find the correct answer to a moral dilemma. You might have one answer, someone else might have, etc. We'll have different answers to a moral dilemma. Kant argues no, that if you're a rational person, you will know the right thing to do. So I'm setting up this moral dilemma here. What would you do in this case where the woman is being attacked by these three guys? Kant thinks that you will know the right thing to do. And he refers to this as your moral imperative, or your categorical imperative, right? right? So categorical imperative. Which is the same thing for him as our knowing a triangle, that in a moral dilemma, we know the rational right answer of what we should do. Although Kant points out that most people may not do what they're morally supposed to do. That's our big problem, that we know what the right answer is, but we won't do it because of whatever. Yes?
So do you think this is something we're just born with, the knowledge of morals, or it's something we learn?
It seems like it's, well, that's the problem. Kant doesn't really explain where this comes from, and that's why there's this split after Kant, who are all trying to figure out, okay, well, so where can we explain some of this? So you have Gestalt psychologists, for example, that will argue that we do have some sort of a biological mechanism that enables us to put certain things together. That's why you even get like the Gestalt tests, the Rorschach tests, because I had to take one of those once myself when I was applying for seminary. They wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. And so they had me go to Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia, and a psychiatrist gave me a Rorschach test where I had, those ink blots, the bilaterally symmetrical, right? Are you familiar with the Rorschach test? And he just sat there with a very straight face, and I was supposed to tell him what I saw. And you can't say it's a stinking bilaterally symmetrical ink blot, right? It's another stinking bilaterally symmetrical ink blot. That's nothing. No, that's not playing the game. You had to see something. And then he of course had his, categories, knowing that if you see these kinds of things, you're crazy. If you see these kinds of things, you're normal. And you had to try to guess what was the normal things. So you're playing a game with him over what sort of things a person would see if they were normal. I passed the test, so I would have been allowed to enter seminary, except I got cold feet. Decided not to go in, and instead joined the army for the money. That was, however, so Gestalt, that's one kind of response to it. But then Freud, of course, is going to be another response to Kant's psychology, the idea that there is a maturation, that we go through various stages, the anal stage, the oral stage, the penal, the genital, all these stages, which pretty much everyone, for the most part, figures was totally wrong. Interesting, brought us into what was called the age of insight, because we realized that we might not be our own boss, that we might have unconscious motives, etc., that direct us, etc. But that was another approach to try to figure out, well, where does this come from? Why does some people have what are normal responses to stimuli and other people not? Behaviorism is clearly another aspect of that, where you can literally change a person's behavior by the right kind of stimuli, etc. Then Carl Jung is still another one who's famous for his attempt to respond to this by arguing that it has to do with our moral narratives that we believe, right? That, remember, I use this a lot, the idea that you grow up learning a story, you have a role in the story, you learn what the individual in that story is supposed to do to be good at parenting or whatever, and that's where you're going to get your rational behavior from the story, right? And others, there's obviously others. So Kant leads us into this morass of problem. It really rescued us from thinking that the world is out there and we just have to put up with it, to the view that we're the ones that perceive the world a certain way. But then how does that work, right? So, are we out of time? No, we're good, right? I can't see that clock from here, but I have this one down here. So the categorical imperative, he definitely believes if you are a rational person, you will know what the morally right thing to do is. And he thinks we'll all follow the same moral answer. But obviously he was so culturally deprived that he did not see the big picture of all the different other cultures and all the different possibilities. So it was absolutely wonderful that he led us to a certain brink, but he didn't go beyond that, as far as I can tell. Of course, there are a lot of folks that read a lot more Kant than I ever did, and maybe you could find some of that stuff. He also talks about the critique of pure reason was his first critique, right? That's part of the title. But then he had the critique of practical reason. Which was the second one. I think it was just 2 years after the first, 1788. Let's check. Oh, okay, so 1781, so 7 years. But then the third one is the critique of judgment. And that's his analysis of beauty. And those are your three Kantian critiques. so that's 2 years. That was so 1781, 1788, and 1790. And I think he died in 1796. Is that sort of stuff important? Or is that just what you call trivia? What did I, oh, so 1804. You saw, look, did any of you watch the rest of that movie, the final days of Immanuel Kant, the French movie? It's about an hour and a half long, but interesting to watch. So the problem that leads us into the next step is, of course, this issue that while Kant points towards our self as the source for the metaphysical explanation of how we structure our experience, he doesn't really give us much to explain where that comes from. And another part of this, by the way, is the ego, the self. Remember, Hume points out that you can't actually see the self, so we have no experience of the persistent self. Kant's answer to that is that we have to have a self that's experiencing the phenomena. So if we think of Kant's picture, we can essentially say, okay, so what we're experiencing is phenomena. And phenomena as a word is a Greek word that stands for phene, meaning a lantern, that you go out into the dark with a lantern, and then the phenomena that you're experiencing is what your lantern lights up for you to see, right? So what you can experience is a result of your bringing your own lantern to shine on what you see. Right? Is that a good good metaphor? You see how that works, right? So I'm experiencing the world, but the reason I'm experiencing it is because I'm flashing my lantern on my experience, and then I'm getting all this feedback from my own lantern. Does that make sense? How that works, right? So that's the model. My experience is me-centered, right? But obviously, the question then is, how does the me get structured, right? And he argues that you have to have a self, or you can't be having an experience. He also argues that there has to be stuff out there, or you can't be having a relationship between the self that you can't see and the stuff that you can't see that gives you your experiences, right? So you have to have the things out there, and you have to have yourself. We can transcend our limit that Hume imposed, basically, and this gives us our transcendental method. If you hear of Kant's transcendental method, what is this transcendental method? Is how we can transcend the limit that Hume kind of imposes on us by giving us the empiricist conclusion that you can't actually see the things in themselves, nor can you see yourself, nor can we figure out why we have all these connections between cause and effect, and contiguity in time and space, and all that kind of stuff, right? Where does all those relations of ideas come from? Surely not from the things themselves. Answer, Hume is right. It's not coming from the things themselves. It's coming from the way our minds structure our experience. So the way a human experiences the reality is going to be way different than a rat or a snake. Things, right? They see, or a bat. One of the really famous essays not too long ago was by Thomas Nagel. What is it like to be a bat? And the obvious answer is we can't possibly know what it would be like to actually be a bat. But we can hypothesize. Because they're mammals, but they don't have an eye. Well, they have eyes, but they can't use them to see. They use sonar or radar or whatever, right? That kind of stuff. But that's the same kind of puzzle. We can't actually know what it's like to. I can't know what Sean's life is like. I'd have to be in his moccasins. And if I walked 3 miles in his moccasins, he'd be 3 miles back there with no shoes on. That would, so. Sorry, that's a joke. But you get the idea. We talk this way. I can't really know what you're like unless I've experienced, or at least you've shared your experience with me, right? It used to be you'd study philosophers and you would just read what they wrote. Now, we want to know biography. We want to know what that philosopher's life was like, what led that philosopher to have those kinds of experience that led her to say the things she does. Because otherwise I don't feel like I understand where she's coming from. That's exactly how we say that, right? So the concept of the self, the ego, is a puzzle. But he imposes this kind of framework on us. But obviously it doesn't work. It's too limited. And so what happens next is a whole generation of folks that are going to respond to Kant by coming up with stuff that will explain where these differences between people come from, right? And an awful lot of that happened in continental Europe. I mean, that's where a lot of some of it happens in the United States. Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the great American philosophers. You're familiar with him, Emerson? The philosophy department at Harvard is in Emerson Hall, for example. Quine had his office there. Kind of neat. But because any of the philosophy department, that's where they had their office. By the way, they do have a wheelchair accessible door in the back. The front is one of those magnificent entranceways, so you can't imagine having access with a wheelchair, but so of course they built a special access ramp in the back for wheelchairs. And Emerson, of course, is famous for lots of reasons. Why we don't really discuss him much at all in philosophy classes is a good question. But most of the reaction to Kant happened in continental Europe. And it's at that point that there's kind of a split between the British philosophers and the American philosophers, who were kind of piggybacked on the Brits for this, and continental Europe, which really goes off and tries to answer these questions. And the one tradition in the British and the American philosophies is referred to as the analytic tradition. We mostly focus on language. So as far as we're concerned, language is what really makes the difference from one culture to another. But when you go to continental Europe, they're still trying to figure out how to get around that language prison, to figure out how you can actually get to being and understand being apart from the way language structures our experience. So we'll take a look at those as well as we go. So from here on in, we'll kind of be looking at the two sides separately as we go. What else is interesting? So we have our quiz question. Yes? I forget what it was.
Are some cultures more rational than others?
Yeah, boy, that's a I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for that one. It's just not a liberal point of view, is it? What else? Thank you. Be safe out there. There were moose all over the place. I don't know if you were watching, especially if you're walking up to the dorms. The police were guarding us last night, but I don't know where the moose are today. Any questions for me? I can confuse you with something.
I'm trying to figure out exactly the frame of the question. So, the February 12th lecture, I'm sure it is, the question was, you find the media overstimulation in modern times a problem? And was that what you were basically asking? It just wasn't really clear as a question.
Yeah, so what's become obvious to me is that the media distracts us constantly.
What was it comes to?
And not only because we're seeing so much media, but also because it sticks in our minds. So like the squirrel effect, that you hear a phrase right away, you remember the movie where that phrase came from. Right? And so,
By the way,
pardon?
the movie was Up, because I know you
It
were
was
asking.
Up. Oh, yes.
And,
Squirrel.
And I was like, oh, what's up?
Yeah, and our minds were not originally designed for this. They were, I imagine, in a situation where you're in the woods, where visual stimuli only occurred once, and never repeated it. Seeing people and everything, you wouldn't have seen a commercial 2 times in exactly the same way. And then the next commercial break, you see it again 2 times in exactly the same way. And then again, so that you can actually have the commercial memorized in your head, right?
I guess way to agree on who you are. I mean, there's commercials that I might recognize, but at the same time, I generally just all resistance. But could you not argue that falls at the same time? Adaptability is one of the traits, so could be in that. I mean, fine example is
Yeah,
fine example is I, pretty much growing up playing gaming my entire life, can tell the difference between maybe like a screen that gives me 60 frames and a screen that gives me 120. Because the whole argument was, well, people can't really see. People can't really see
Very
above
good
60
point.
frames,
Yeah.
but I can tell the difference. I can tell even with like excess frame drops go down. And it's the same like as you would mixing up and my friend. Meanwhile, my other friend Jim cannot. He has a harder time standing high definition movies because whereas it's like that basic argument of people that either you like Sopranos or you hate them. More or less, like, because Sopranos are filmed in 6 frames per second, but most movies are framed in 30. And your brain has that, some people do, some people don't, have that more majority don't. They can't stand, their brain tries to find something wrong with the visual stimuli because it's too realistic, and the brain already recognizes that they're watching something. It's not visually there, as you have stated, on screen, just like,